I want to talk about metaphor, or the stories we tell ourselves, particularly in this strange new world that we find ourselves in. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with what a metaphor is, here's a simple definition I snipped from Google. Basically, it's a form of symbolism. It's a story we tell ourselves. It's a mechanism by which we assign some form of story or statement to something. This is particularly true and has particularly come to the fore in this new world of COVID-19, and in particular after the market cratered itself. One of the things that is intriguing about when we have these market events is the number of homily statements, metaphors that people come out with, as if there's some form of justification or some form of direction for action moving forward. The one that has been doing the rounds of late, particularly on social media, is this quote by Baron Rothschild's. "The time to buy is when there's blood in the street, even if it's your own." Now, many are using this as an invocation that now is the time to start buying, which history will probably tell us is a fairly stupid idea. But once again, we come back to the notion of context. The people who parrot this statement don't actually understand its relevancy or the place it has in history. This statement is ascribed to Rothschilds after he made a small fortune following Wellington's victory at the Battle of Waterloo. What people misunderstand or misinterpret is that they don't realise that Rothschild's made his fortune not because of this statement, but because of his superior information flow. Rothschild's was aware of Wellington's victory before everybody else because he had set in place an information network that guaranteed that he would be. If you were to put it into modern parlance, you could say that Rothschild's was one of the first of the high-frequency traders. Now granted, high frequency back then was what we would consider glacial, but he had an information edge, not a psychological one as this implies. He made his fortune because he saw things before others did and then acted upon them. So he was acting in a manner where he had an advantage. He already knew the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo before others did, so he could act upon that. Unfortunately, at present, every peanut whose parents paid for them to do an online MBA is dusting off their copy of Sun Tzu's Art of the War and generating all sorts of nonsense statements such as "a wet duck never flies at night," and somehow attempting to apply this to the market as it appears now. An historical point about Sun Tzu: he only ever won one battle. If you are after any sort of treatise on how to win battles, I would really look at anything Napoleon wrote. But the important point here is that words, stories, narratives, metaphors all inform the way we think. Everything we read, be it on social media, be it in old-fashioned print press, be it on the internet, informs the way we think. Humans are storytellers. We are wired to take advantage of stories. We are wired to process information as a narrative, not as data. And so the things you put in to your brain, in terms of the stories you tell yourselves and others tell you, will bring about a psychological and physiological change within you. So that when we have this sort of nonsense statement at times of market crisis, well then, without you realising it, your brain begins to form a series of images. And those images have an impact. They have an impact upon you emotionally, they have an impact upon you psychologically, which means in turn they will have an impact upon your trading. So if we consider this notion that trading is like, well, consider the imagery that invokes. These are British soldiers in Pozières in France in the First World War who've been blinded in a gas attack. To my way of thinking, this is an inappropriate image for the notion of trading. And if we look at some of the words that are applied to war, and this is from the very excellent site by Dr. Claire Makepeace, who looks at the emotions surrounding war, none of these are appropriate words to apply to trading. Granted, people will feel terror and loss momentarily when they see the market doing this, but this image here is very, very different to what you would expect for notions of war. And as someone who comes from a long line of soldiers dating back to the First World War, through the Second World War, through the Korean War, and through Falklands, I can guarantee you that their impression of what I do during the day is vastly different to what they did during the day. Now, granted, social media is awash with John Wayne-style heroes talking about how much money they're making and how they're facing down the demons of the market. But for those of you with a bent towards history, little fun exercise, particularly if you're interested in films. Google John Wayne's attempts to dodge the draft during the Second World War. They are wonderfully creative, and you get a sense of why the legendary director John Ford used to refer to him as that coward John Wayne. So this notion of what is real and what is not real is problematic for traders. Because the real image of war, the one that your brain will drop to, is this. So the question becomes, for you, what is your narrative? Because your narrative creates your reality. And I'm not talking of that sort of nonsense approach of The Secret, whereby if you just wish for money, it appears. I'm talking about the fact that when you begin to tell yourself stories, you're creating within yourself a paradigm within which you are imprisoned. And so if your story about markets is this, then you are imprisoned by that. You have to see the market in these terms. You have to see it in terms of this absolute destruction, in terms of this terror, in terms of this horror, when it is actually none of those things. I would perhaps posit that a more appropriate metaphor, and the one I use, is one of surfing. Some days are very good days to be on the waves. Some days are quite poor. Some days are days you will remember forever, and occasionally you will get dumped on your head. And there are also days that you will remember. But this is a vastly different image to this. One informs a narrative that is calm, relaxed, open and gentle, and the other one generates a narrative that is destructive.